everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're diving into something pretty intense.
Yeah, this one's a thinker for sure.
We're tackling Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death.
Pulitzer Prize winner.
Exactly. This book's considered a masterpiece.
And for good reason. It grapples with some really deep questions about what it means to be human.
Yeah, it's not exactly light reading, but...
It's worth the effort, trust me.
So, what is it about the denial of death that makes it so captivating?
Well, Becker starts with a pretty simple but kind of terrifying premise.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of our own mortality is a driving force behind almost everything we do.
Okay, I gotta admit, just hearing you say that out loud kind of gives me chills. I mean, we all know we're not going to live forever, but are we really spending all our time secretly terrified of death?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
Why do people go to such lengths to achieve fame?
Right.
Amass fortunes? Or leave behind a legacy?
Or even just like simpler things.
Yeah.
Why do we put so much energy into our hobbies? Or try to make a difference in our communities?
It's like we're driven to create something that outlasts us.
Now that you mention it,
Yeah.
it does seem like there's this underlying urge to create something that outlasts us.
Right.
Even if it's just a beautiful garden or a positive impact on the people around us.
Exactly. And that's what makes Becker's argument so compelling. He calls it the Causa Sui project.
The Causa Sui project.
Yeah, this inherent human need to create meaning and value in a world where our individual existence is finite.
So are you saying that even seemingly mundane activities like, I don't know, baking the perfect sourdough loaf
Oh, absolutely.
could be seen as part of this Causa Sui project?
Absolutely. It's fascinating how even our hobbies, those things we do for pleasure, self-expression, can be tied back to this deeper desire to leave our mark on the world, to create something that transcends our own limited lifespan.
Wow, okay. This is already making me look at my weekend baking habit in a whole new light. But let's back up for a second. You mentioned this idea that the fear of death is a universal motivator.
Right.
But isn't it possible that some people are just more, I don't know, aware of their mortality than others?
That's a great question. It gets to the heart of one of the biggest debates about the fear of death.
Okay.
There's this school of thought, the healthy-minded perspective,
Okay.
that argues that the fear of death isn't innate.
Hmm.
They believe it's a learned fear, something we acquire through experience or cultural conditioning.
Okay.
Then there's the opposing view,
Right.
the morbidly minded
Okay.
perspective, which suggests that the fear of death is present in everyone from birth.
So which side does Becker take?
Well, he's definitely in the morbidly minded camp.
Okay.
Becker argues that the awareness of death and the anxiety it produces,
Right.
it isn't just some random human quirk. It's actually the foundation upon which all of culture and civilization is built.
Wow, okay. Now that's a bold claim. But if this fear is so deeply ingrained, how on earth do we even function in everyday life? Wouldn't we be, paralyzed by terror all the time?
That's where things get really interesting. Becker argues that we develop these elaborate defense mechanisms to cope with this existential dread, and he calls them, rather dramatically, vital lies.
Vital lies.
Yeah.
So we're basically living in a world of carefully constructed illusions
In a way, yes.
to shield ourselves from the harsh realities of life and death.
These vital lies.
Yeah.
They're the stories we tell ourselves, the identities we create,
Yeah.
the cultural systems we embrace, anything that helps us avoid facing the uncomfortable truth that our time is limited.
So it's like we're building these psychological walls to protect ourselves from the ultimate existential boogeyman, death.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Think about it. We get so invested in our careers, our relationships, our hobbies, our political beliefs. We create all these narratives about who we are and what's important. And according to Becker, a big part of the motivation behind all of this is to create a sense of meaning and purpose that helps us feel less terrified of our inevitable demise.
This is starting to make me think about how much we romanticize certain aspects of life. Like when people look back in their childhood with, rose-tinted glasses,
Yeah.
remembering all the good times, but conveniently forgetting the awkward phases or the family dramas.
Right.
Is that kind of what Becker's talking about?
Absolutely. He actually uses a great example from a writer named Thomas Traherne, who described his childhood in these idyllic, almost heavenly terms.
Okay.
And Becker points out that this is likely a selective memory, a way of distorting reality to make it more palatable.
Yeah.
We tend to highlight the beauty and wonder. while conveniently forgetting the more unpleasant aspects of existence.
Okay, so we're all crafting these narratives, these vital lies, to avoid facing, you know,
The big D.
the big D.
Yeah.
But where does this leave, like, the heroes?
Yeah.
The people who seem to face danger and even death head on, they don't seem to be in denial.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads us to one of Becker's most fascinating concepts.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we strive for a kind of symbolic immortality. Even if we can't escape physical death, we crave a legacy, a sense that our lives have meaning and will be remembered. Heroism, in a way, is the ultimate expression of this desire.
So are you saying that those who risk their lives for a cause or create art that inspires generations are essentially trying to leave a piece of themselves behind that will outlast their physical existence?
Exactly. And this desire for symbolic immortality.
Yeah.
It doesn't just play out on a grand scale. Think about everyday acts of heroism.
Okay, yeah.
The parent who sacrifices their own comfort for their child.
Right.
The volunteer who dedicates their time to helping others.
Yeah.
The artist who pours their heart and soul into their creations.
You're right. It's like this drive to make a meaningful impact, to leave the world a little better than we found it, is woven into the fabric of our being.
And that's what makes Becker's analysis so powerful. He's suggesting that this fear of death, while often unconscious,
Right.
is a profoundly motivating force, shaping our individual choices
Yeah.
and influencing the very structures of our societies.
Okay, so we've got this fear of death lurking beneath the surface, driving us to create, to connect, to achieve. But how does this play out in our relationships with other people? Do we see this fear manifesting in how we interact with loved ones, friends, even strangers?
That's an excellent question, and it leads us into another key aspect of Becker's thinking, his exploration of something called transference.
Oh, I've heard of that in the context of therapy, right? Like
Sure.
when you project feelings about your parents onto your therapist?
Yes, but Becker takes this concept a step further. He argues that transference isn't just something that happens in the therapist's office. It's a fundamental aspect of human interaction, playing out in all sorts of relationships,
Yeah.
from our romantic partners to our bosses,
Wow.
to even our favorite celebrities.
So you're saying that when we idolize a rock star, feel intensely loyal to a certain politician, we're actually projecting our own anxieties about death and the search for meaning onto them.
That's precisely what Becker suggests.
Wow.
He sees transference as this natural human impulse to seek out individuals or groups that embody the values, the ideals, the strengths
Right.
that we crave, those who can, in a sense, make us feel more complete, more heroic, less alone in the face of our mortality.
This is blowing my mind. We're seeking these connections, these sources of meaning,
Right.
these ways to feel heroic, all because deep down we're terrified of the inevitable.
That's a pretty good summary of where we are so far. And what's even more interesting is that Becker doesn't just analyze these dynamics, he also critiques how modern society deals with,
Right.
or rather avoids dealing with,
Right.
these deep-seated anxieties.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Mhm.
What does he have to say about how we moderns are handling or mishandling our fear of death?
Well, Becker argues that one of the biggest challenges for us modern folks is we've lost a lot of those traditional sources of meaning and comfort that people used to rely on to cope with the fear of death.
You mean like religion?
Exactly.
Yeah.
For centuries, religions provided these grand narratives that helped people make sense of life and death
Right.
and everything in between.
Yeah.
They offered rituals, symbols, beliefs.
Right.
That provided a sense of order and purpose in a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
So are you saying that now that fewer people subscribe to those traditional religious beliefs, we're kind of left to figure things out on our own? And that makes us more anxious about death?
That's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Becker argues that this decline in traditional belief systems has left a kind of spiritual void for a lot of people.
Right.
We no longer have those ready-made answers to the big existential questions.
Yeah.
And that can leave us feeling adrift, unsure of where to turn for meaning and solace.
Okay, so if we're not turning to religion as much as we used to, how are we trying to fill that void? What are we doing to cope with these anxieties about death in a world that feels increasingly secular?
Well, Becker observes that we've seen this rise in what he calls therapeutic religion, this merging of psychology and spirituality.
Okay.
That attempts to address those existential questions that
Wow.
science often struggles to answer.
So it's like we're turning inward, looking for answers within ourselves, rather than from external authorities or doctrines.
Precisely. And this can manifest in a lot of ways. Think about the popularity of self-help books,
Oh, yeah.
meditation apps, mindfulness practices, all sorts of therapies and workshops
Right.
that promise to help you find inner peace, unlock your full potential.
It's like everyone's on this quest for self-discovery and personal growth. But is Becker saying that that's a bad thing?
Well, he's not necessarily saying it's inherently bad.
Okay.
He acknowledges that personal growth can be valuable,
Right.
but he also cautions against what he calls therapeutic megalomania.
Therapeutic megalomania. That sounds pretty intense. What does that even mean?
It's this belief that if we just focus enough on ourselves,
Okay.
if we achieve perfect self-awareness, inner peace, then we can somehow transcend the fundamental anxieties of existence,
Including the fear of death.
including the fear of death.
Oh, I see. So it's like saying, if I just meditate enough or find the perfect therapist, then death won't be a problem anymore.
Exactly. It's this idea that we can somehow outsmart or outgrow our own mortality through personal growth alone.
Right.
And Becker argues that this is just another form of denial, another way of avoiding those uncomfortable truths about our existence.
So he's not a fan of all the self-help gurus telling us we can achieve perfect happiness and conquer our fears.
He's definitely skeptical of those who promise easy answers
Right.
or suggest that we can achieve some kind of existential invincibility through self-improvement.
Right.
He believes that a more honest and authentic approach to life and to death involves acknowledging our limitations and embracing those uncomfortable realities that we often try to avoid.
Okay, so he's not buying into the whole "you can be anything you want to be" mantra.
Not exactly. Remember, Becker's starting point is this idea that the fear of death
Yeah.
is a fundamental part of the human experience.
Right.
So any attempt to completely eradicate that fear is ultimately going to be futile.
So what's the alternative? If we can't find solace in traditional religion or achieve perfect self-actualization, how are we supposed to cope with this existential dread?
Well, Becker suggests that a possible path forward lies in what he calls a fusion of science and religion.
Wait a minute. Didn't we just talk about how he criticizes religion for providing those, vital lies?
Well, he does critique certain aspects of traditional religion, particularly the tendency to offer dogmatic answers
Okay.
and to deny the realities of our physical existence.
Right.
But he's not advocating for a complete rejection of religion. He's proposing a more nuanced approach, one that acknowledges the limitations of both science and religion,
Okay.
while recognizing the potential for a more integrated worldview.
So it's not about choosing sides, team science versus team religion.
Right.
It's about finding a way to bring those two perspectives together.
That's the idea. Becker argues that science is great at explaining the how of the universe, the mechanisms and processes that govern the physical world.
Right.
But it often falls short when it comes to answering the why. Those big existential questions about meaning, purpose, our place within the grand scheme of things. Religion, on the other hand, has traditionally offered frameworks for addressing those why questions, providing narratives that give meaning to human suffering, morality, and the quest for transcendence.
So it's like science tells us how the universe works, and religion tries to tell us why it exists in the first place.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And Becker believes that a more integrated worldview could draw upon the strengths of both disciplines, acknowledging the factual truths of science while also embracing the human need for meaning, purpose, and connection to something larger than ourselves.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? How do we bridge that gap between science and religion in a way that feels authentic and meaningful?
Well, Becker suggests that one possible path lies in embracing what he calls the lived truth of creation.
The lived truth of creation. You've got to break that down for me. What exactly does that mean?
It's about recognizing the awe-inspiring,
Yeah.
sometimes terrifying nature of existence.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging the interconnectedness of all things,
Right.
the vastness of the universe, our own
Yeah.
small but significant place within it.
When you put it that way, it makes me think about those incredible images from the James Webb Space Telescope. Those mind-blowing glimpses into the depths of the cosmos. Do you think that's kind of what Becker's getting at?
I think those images are a perfect example of what Becker is talking about.
Okay.
They remind us of just how vast and mysterious the universe is,
Right.
how much we still don't understand. But they also evoke this sense of wonder and awe,
Yeah.
a recognition that we're part of something much greater than ourselves.
It's like we're shifting our perspective from this egocentric view of the world to something much more expansive and humbling.
Exactly. And this shift in perspective,
Yeah.
Becker argues, can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to move beyond those ego-driven pursuits of power, wealth, and status
Yeah.
that often leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled,
Okay.
and to find a deeper sense of purpose in connection, compassion, creativity,
Right.
our contributions to the well-being of others and the planet as a whole.
So it's not about conquering the world, but about understanding our place within it and finding meaning in those connections and contributions that make us feel like we're a part of something larger than ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And this shift in perspective can also help us grapple with the reality of death
Okay.
in a more honest and accepting way.
Instead of fearing death as like the ultimate annihilation,
Yeah,
we start to see it as a natural part of the cycle of life, a transition rather than an ending.
precisely. And this acceptance can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to focus on living more fully in the present moment, appreciating the preciousness of life, cherishing our connections to the people and experiences that bring us joy.
Wow, this is a lot to take in. We've gone from the fear of death to the psychology of groups to the need for a more integrated worldview.
It's a lot, yeah.
And it all circles back to this fundamental question. How do we find meaning and purpose in a world where death is inevitable? Does Becker offer any concrete answers, or is he just leaving us with more questions?
Well, Becker isn't about providing easy answers.
Okay.
His work is more about provoking thought, challenging us to examine our own beliefs and motivations.
Right.
He doesn't offer a step-by-step guide to happiness or enlightenment.
Yeah.
Instead, he gives us this framework for understanding the human condition, our fears, our desires, and our potential for both greatness and self-destruction.
It's like he's giving us the tools to explore these big questions for ourselves.
Yeah.
To find our own paths to meaning and fulfillment.
Exactly. And he reminds us that this journey, it's not about achieving some perfect state of being, but about embracing the complexities and contradictions of life, even in the face of our own mortality.
All this talk about confronting the reality of death is pretty intense.
It's heavy stuff.
But it's also strangely empowering.
Yeah.
Like maybe by acknowledging our fears and limitations, we can actually live more freely and authentically.
I think that's one of the key takeaways from Becker's work.
Okay.
It's not about denying death or trying to escape it. It's about finding a way to live with it, to accept it as an integral part of what it means to be human.
Okay, so we've explored the fear of death, the desire for meaning,
Right.
the ways we try to cope with our mortality. But Becker also delves into how these anxieties manifest in various forms of mental illness.
Right, it does.
I'm curious to hear what he has to say about that.
It's a fascinating part of his analysis.
Yeah.
He's not saying that all mental illness is directly caused by the fear of death,
Right.
but he's highlighting how these anxieties can play a significant role in shaping our psychological experiences
Okay.
and how we cope with the challenges of existence.
So, for example, how does he explain something like depression?
He describes depression as the bogging down of an unheroic life,
Okay.
often accompanied by guilt and self-accusation.
So it's like feeling trapped in a life devoid of meaning and purpose, which leads to a sense of hopelessness and despair. And maybe that feeling of being like unheroic ties back to that deep-seated need to find meaning and create a legacy that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's like that Kozasui project gone awry.
Okay.
When we feel like we're failing to live up to our own expectations
Right.
for meaning and purpose,
Right.
it can trigger those feelings of worthlessness and despair that are often associated with depression.
That's a really insightful connection. And what about something like schizophrenia? How does he view that through the lens of the fear of death?
He describes schizophrenia as a terrifying disintegration of self and body, fueled by an inability to integrate symbolic and physical experiences.
Okay, so remind me again. What's human dualism?
Right. It's that inherent conflict between our symbolic selves, our aspirations for meaning and immortality, and the reality of our physical bodies, which are subject to decay and death.
Right, that constant inner tug of war between our big dreams and ambitions.
Yeah.
And the reality of our physical limits.
Exactly. And in schizophrenia, this struggle becomes so intense that it can lead to a profound sense of fragmentation and alienation from both oneself and the world. Imagine struggling to reconcile the symbolic world of ideas and meanings
Right.
with the physical realities of your own body.
Yeah.
It's a deeply unsettling experience.
So in a way, schizophrenia is like the ultimate expression of that fear of death and the struggle to find meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and overwhelming.
That's one way to look at it. And while Becker acknowledges the complexity of these conditions, the role of biological factors,
Yeah.
he's highlighting how existential anxieties
Mm.
can contribute to the experience of mental illness.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like these anxieties are always present to some degree, but in certain individuals, they become so amplified that they manifest in these more extreme psychological states.
And finally, Becker touches upon perversion,
Okay.
suggesting it can be seen as a protest against species sameness.
Protest against species sameness? What does he mean by that?
Well, Becker argues that one of the things that makes us human is our capacity for symbolic thought, our ability to create meaning and to transcend our animal nature.
Right.
But that also means we're constantly aware of our own mortality,
Right.
which can be a pretty heavy burden to bear.
So perversion, in a way, is like a way of pushing back against those limitations, of asserting our individuality and seeking pleasure and fulfillment outside of those conventional, socially sanctioned norms.
That's a good interpretation.
Okay.
It's like a rebellion against the constraints of our physical existence.
Right.
And those cultural expectations that try to define who we are and how we're supposed to live.
It's like saying, I'm going to find my own way to experience life, even if it means breaking the rules.
Exactly. And while Becker certainly isn't condoning harmful or destructive behavior, he's trying to understand the underlying motivations behind those who deviate from societal norms. He's suggesting that there's often a deeper longing for freedom, for meaning, for a sense of control in a world that can often feel overwhelming and unpredictable.
This is all so fascinating, but also a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, it can be a bit unnerving.
It's like Becker is peeling back the layers of human behavior and revealing these deep-seated anxieties that we often try so hard to ignore. It makes you wonder, is there any way to escape this fear of death and the constant struggle for meaning?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And unfortunately, Becker doesn't offer a simple solution.
Okay.
But he does offer some insights into how we might navigate these existential challenges in a more honest and authentic way.
Okay, I'm all ears. If we can't achieve perfect happiness or eliminate the fear of death, what can we do?
Well, Becker emphasizes the importance of accepting the reality of our situation.
Okay.
Instead of trying to deny our mortality.
Yeah.
To find some ultimate escape from it.
Right.
He suggests that we need to find a way to live with it, to embrace it as an integral part of what it means to be human.
That sounds a lot easier said than done. How do we actually embrace the reality of our own mortality without freaking out?
It's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
But Becker suggests that one way to start is by shifting our focus from self-preservation to something more expansive, something that acknowledges our interconnectedness with the world around us.
So instead of trying to build walls to protect ourselves from the fear of death, we need to break down those walls and connect with something larger than ourselves.
Precisely. And this can manifest in a lot of ways.
Okay.
It could be through deepening our relationships with loved ones, engaging in creative pursuits, contributing to our communities, or simply appreciating the beauty and wonder of the natural world.
It's like we're trading that narrow, ego-driven perspective for something much broader and more meaningful.
And this shift in perspective, Becker argues, can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to move beyond those anxieties about our own individual survival.
Right.
And to find a deeper sense of purpose in our connections to others, to the world around us, and to something that transcends our limited lifespan.
Okay, so we need to embrace the reality of death, connect with something larger than ourselves, and find meaning in those connections. But I'm still struggling with this idea of accepting my own mortality. It just feels so, final and scary.
It is scary.
Yeah.
But remember, Becker isn't advocating for some kind of morbid fascination with death.
Right.
He's suggesting that by acknowledging our mortality, we can actually live more fully and authentically in the present moment.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like if we're constantly trying to deny or avoid the reality of death, we're missing out on the beauty and preciousness of life itself.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of Becker's most insightful observations. He argues that much of modern society's focus on individual happiness and self-fulfillment is actually a form of denial, a way of avoiding those deeper existential questions.
Right.
That can lead to true meaning and purpose.
Okay, so he's not buying into the whole live your best life and follow your bliss mantra that's so popular these days.
He's definitely skeptical of those who suggest that happiness is the ultimate goal of human existence.
Right.
He believes that true fulfillment comes from something much deeper, something that goes beyond our own individual desires and gratifications.
So if happiness isn't the answer, what is?
Becker suggests that true fulfillment comes from finding meaning in something larger than ourselves, something that connects us to something beyond our own individual existence.
So it's not about pursuing our own happiness, but about finding a sense of purpose and meaning in something that transcends our own limited lifespan.
Exactly. And this is manifest in a lot of ways.
Okay.
It could be through our relationships, our work,
Yeah.
our creative pursuits, our spiritual beliefs, or our commitment to making a positive impact on the world.
It's like we're shifting our focus from what's in it for me to how can I contribute to something greater than myself?
That's a powerful way to put it.
Oh, yeah.
And this shift in perspective,
Yeah.
Becker argues, can be incredibly liberating.
Okay.
It frees us from the tyranny of our own ego, allows us to find a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment in something that transcends our own individual needs and desires.
Well, this talk about finding meaning and embracing the reality of death is pretty profound. But I'm wondering how it actually plays out in everyday life. How do we apply these ideas in a way that feels practical and relevant?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into Becker's critique of how we as modern individuals tend to navigate the anxieties of existence and how we might approach these challenges in a more authentic and meaningful way.
Okay. I'm definitely intrigued. We've covered a lot of ground already, from the fear of death to the psychology of groups to the need for a more integrated worldview. And it's clear that Becker's ideas are both challenging and inspiring.
They are.
They force us to confront those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world, while also offering this glimmer of hope, the possibility of finding meaning and purpose even within the limitations of our existence. So we're back, and this deep dive into the denial of death is really making me think about how I approach life,
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
We talked about this fear of death lurking beneath the surface, driving our actions, the ways we try to find meaning, create a legacy.
Right.
But you mentioned Becker also critiques how modern society tries to deal with these anxieties.
Right, he does. It gets to the heart of what we were discussing earlier about the rise of therapeutic religion that focus on self-actualization.
Right.
Becker sees a real danger in this overemphasis on individual happiness and this belief that we can somehow conquer all of our anxieties through personal growth alone.
So he's not a fan of all those self-help gurus telling us to manifest our destiny and achieve our best selves. I gotta admit, I've definitely fallen for some of that messaging myself.
It's tempting stuff, isn't it? But Becker argues that this relentless pursuit of individual happiness can actually be a form of denial, a way of avoiding those bigger existential questions about meaning and purpose and our place in the universe.
So it's like we're so focused on achieving some perfect state of personal bliss that we're missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And Becker suggests that this focus on personal liberation can actually lead to a kind of isolation and narcissism.
Oh, okay.
Instead of connecting us to something larger than ourselves, it can trap us in our own self-improvement bubble.
It's like we're building these elaborate fortresses of self-esteem and positive affirmations, but we're still hiding from those bigger truths about life and death.
That's a great analogy. And Becker believes that a more authentic approach involves embracing those uncomfortable realities that we often try to avoid.
So instead of trying to escape our fears and anxieties, we need to kind of lean into them. That sounds a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does go against a lot of the messaging we hear in modern culture. But Becker argues that this is the path to genuine growth and fulfillment.
Okay.
He suggests that by confronting rather than denying those deeper existential concerns, we can actually find a more meaningful and purposeful way to live.
Okay, but how do we do that? How do we confront those big, scary questions about life and death without getting totally overwhelmed by anxiety?
Well, remember that idea of the lived truth of creation we talked about earlier.
Right.
Becker believes that connecting with something larger than ourselves, something that transcends our individual ego and lifespan, is key to finding meaning and purpose in a world where death is inevitable.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're part of something much bigger and more mysterious than our own individual existence.
Exactly. And this can take many forms. It might involve exploring your spirituality, connecting with nature, engaging in creative pursuits, dedicating yourself to a cause you believe in, or simply deepening your relationships with loved ones.
So it's about finding those things that make you feel connected to something beyond yourself, something that gives you a sense of purpose and meaning, even in the face of your own mortality.
Precisely. And this shift in perspective can be incredibly empowering. It allows you to move beyond those petty anxieties and concerns that often consume us, and to focus on something much more meaningful and lasting.
It's like we're reclaiming our humanity, recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals striving for personal happiness, but interconnected beings, sharing this incredible journey of life and death together.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think that's at the heart of what Becker is trying to convey in The Denial of Death. It's not a book about morbidly dwelling on death, but about finding a way to live more fully and authentically in light of its inevitability.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've explored some heavy stuff, the fear of death, the human need for meaning, the ways we try to cope with our mortality.
Right.
And it's clear that Becker's work doesn't offer any easy answers.
No, it doesn't.
But it does give us this powerful framework for understanding ourselves and the world around us.
I think one of the most important takeaways is that the journey of confronting our mortality isn't about achieving some perfect state of fearlessness or enlightenment.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to live with courage, compassion, and a sense of wonder, even in the face of the unknown.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the life and the death, and maybe, just maybe, by acknowledging our limitations. In our mortality, we can actually find a deeper sense of freedom and meaning than we ever thought possible.
Well said. I think Becker would approve of that sentiment. He believed that by confronting our fears, we could unlock a greater capacity for love, creativity, and connection.
Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the brilliant and often unsettling world of Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it, challenging you to examine your own beliefs, your motivations, and your understanding of what it means to be human.
And as we wrap up this exploration, I want to encourage you to keep those questions that Becker raises swirling in your mind. There's no one right answer, no easy solution to the existential dilemmas we've discussed. But by engaging with these questions, by embracing the lived truth of creation, we can each find our own paths to meaning, purpose, and a more authentic way of being in the world.
So keep those questions in mind, and until next time, keep diving deep.